So in the next few slides, basically what we have here is a supplement of the original slide package. So rather than redoing the whole narrated lecture, what I decided to do is just redo some of the slides that I've made some changes to. And that's one of the things about this class, is that some of the material will change every year. Well, some of it has, some of it hasn't. But this particular slide presentation is some things that I wanted to add beyond the one that you just listened to. So let's talk a little bit about processor growth relative to Moore's Law. So I'm sure probably you have heard of Moore's Law before. It's named after Gordon Moore, the Director of Research and Development at Fairchild Semiconductor. And basically Moore's Law states that transistor density will double every 2 years. So if we're going to talk about advances in networking, we need to understand its relationship to processor growth. So obviously it kind of goes both ways, because when processors can go faster and they're using networks to communicate with other devices, I/O becomes a bottleneck. So the network needs to keep up as processors get faster and faster. And of course, I/O devices themselves have processors that can also grow in capability. And of course, you also want to keep in mind that I/O is a small percentage of processor activity. So being a bottleneck can be a problem. So basically, Gordon Moore wrote a paper that basically discussed how processors were going to be getting faster and faster. And at the time, it was considered to be a big insight. But the trend has been, and it's kind of shown on this particular slide, is basically every 2 years, processors become twice as fast. So basically, they double in speed basically every 2 years. And that's basically what we're showing. And basically, the processor growth is based on the number of transistors. The smaller the transistors get, the more work they can do, and the faster the processors can be. And that's what you're seeing here over the years. You see the processor growth as far as the number of transistors. And this is what I talked about in the original slide deck. However, something to consider is the fact that there's starting to become a debate as to whether Moore's Law will continue. For the past 2 or 3 years, people have started to wonder if Moore's Law is done. So I'm going to talk about that debate and discuss both sides of the debate. On one side of the debate is the belief that it will now saturate and you can't put the transistors any closer. So, obviously you just reached a point where you're at the molecular level and you just can't make the transistors any smaller. Because that's basically, like I said in the previous slide, the way you make processors become twice as fast. You make your transistors smaller and smaller, so you can put more on a chip and have more transistors in a processor. Well, what this really means, because that is basically becoming true, it basically means that the method of increasing speed by making smaller and smaller transistors is probably no longer available at this point. So what that means is people need to find other ways to increase processor speed. And of course, the graph that I'm showing here, which basically comes from the article at the bottom of the slide, obviously is not a scientific graph, but is basically kind of a guess where people feel things are going to start to level off. This slide comes from another article on the same topic, which is referenced on the bottom. And according to this article, which is where this graph comes from, is the belief that in 2004 we have already slowed down our rate of processor speed increase and has been leveling off ever since. Granted, we don't know if this is for certain because there could be other methods that people find to improve processor speed, but that is basically the way where the debate is right now. So although it could be possibly true that processors are reaching saturation, networking certainly is not, as we will see in the next few slides. But before I go on to talk about networking, let's talk a little bit about storage. Now, we have faster processors that can read larger disks. So, for example, at one time it would have taken 20 minutes to read a 1 gigabyte disk, whereas now it takes about 2 minutes. So because our processors are faster, our disks can be larger. And we also have better ability to, as a result, better ability to read disks quicker. For example, disks that were read by USB 2 are now use USB 3, which is basically, that standard is 10 times faster than USB 2. This allows us to use large terabyte disks. At this point, disk storage is going very fast. However, demand is increasing even faster than supply. And basically, as you can see from the slide, industry cannot keep up with the demand. So now what is starting to happen is that we're kind of getting past using the giga term. So now the standards bodies have had to come up with other ways to describe number of bytes. So you have exa, zeta, and yottabytes. So I took a second just to change the top part of the slide to make this a little bit easier to read. So basically the standards bodies have added exabytes, which is 10 to the 18th, zettabytes, which is 10 to the 21, and yottabytes, which is 10 to the 24. These scales were extended from gigabytes to yottabytes back in 1991. And basically what you're seeing is a 42% compound annual growth rate in storage capacity size. And so the slide over here, which is basically goes up to 50,000 gigabytes, is basically the equivalent of 50 zettabytes. So that's kind of what I want to talk to as far as storage is showing. The storage is increasing, and of course the demand is increasing, especially as you can see the types of data that we're sending over networks. You can see why storage demands are increasing. So I know you already seen this slide in the original slide deck, but I'm just kind of going to go through it again just for continuity's sake. So as we mentioned previously, networking was given a jolt by two events, one in 2006 and the other one in 2007, that basically has a large impact on what we do today. The first one was in August 25th, 2006, when Amazon announced Elastic Communication 2, or EC2, and this of course was the birth of cloud computing. There were theoretical concepts at the time, but this was the first time that it was done actually in practice. So of course the story is that the head of Amazon went to one of the data centers, and of course he saw all the computers, and he said, hey, how come we have so many computers? Do we really use all of these? And of course the engineers said, no, we don't use all of these. We just use these at Christmas time when we have a lot of book orders, and then for the rest of the year a lot of them sit idle. And of course he had the idea of, okay, let's rent out our unused storage, and that is the birth of cloud computing. And of course cloud computing came from Amazon, and not from Google or Microsoft, although all these other companies have jumped on the bandwagon. And cloud computing is really changing how we do our computing. So that really puts networking in the preeminent position in the computer world, since we're so dependent on cloud computing. The second thing that happened, less than a year later, was Apple announcing the iPhone. Of course, the iPhone changed everything because the iPhone had so much more capability. It was the camera, it provided internet access, it was basically a handheld computer, and of course they also fixed the keyboard problem a lot better than BlackBerry did. So this really changed, changed the capabilities, and it became, of course, exceedingly popular. And another thing that happened was the start of the concept of the apps. Basically, it was an extension of the music apps that Apple was already familiar with from the iTunes market, and it basically just transferred that concept to all different types of computer applications. So now you basically have customized applications that work with the smartphone operating system and the smartphone form function. So this, of course, significantly increased the use of the mobile internet, and it basically also changed how people were using the internet, as we'll talk about in the following slides. And it basically moved a lot of computing from traditional PCs and laptops into the cell phone world once the apps started catching on, especially since now all major companies have mobile apps. And also because they're used globally, app providers have to provide things that are going to be used throughout the world. And the smartphone concept of this handheld computer that you carry around with you that also makes phone calls really makes use of the of cloud computing, because it doesn't really have that much storage on its own, but since it's already tied into the network, basically using cloud services really is a good match for the smartphone. So these two events really kind of changed the paradigm for networking, and it's driving a lot of the future trends. So the next few slides are some additional information that I wanted to cover and add to the original slide deck. This first one, we're going to talk a little bit about cloud computing statistics. So basically, what is happening in cloud computing? Well, basically, I think I mentioned in the previous slide about Google doing a lot of forecasting, and basically that's the kind of the source of this particular slide and the next few slides as well. So Cisco wants to make sure that its customer base knows what all the trends are, so the customers can stay in business and follow the trends, so the customers can go out and buy more Cisco products. So of course, Cisco's not doing this out of the kindness of their heart, but they're helping their customers understand how the computing world is changing and where the trends are going. And that's also very important to you as part of your either current career or future career. If you're going to work in the networking realm, you need to understand where the trends are, especially if you're going to be a product producer, or you want to learn skills to work for a rising product producer where you can have a good good career moving forward. You need to understand these trends. So basically what we have here are some cloud computing statistics. So the first one is basically saying by about 2020 you're going to have 11/12 of the computing workload is going to be in the cloud. and 1/12 in traditional data centers. So one thing I should mention, looking at these statistics, is actually the one thing that's usually common with these statistics is that they tend to be actually low estimates. Now, usually that's because forecasting is traditionally done in a linear fashion, but in real life, things tend to grow more exponentially than linearly. So kind of going through some of the trends we're seeing. So a lot of the workload is going to be in the cloud by 2020, 11/12, with only 1/12 in the traditional data center. Now, granted, when I say cloud, it could be a public cloud or it could be a private cloud. And so basically a lot of the traditional data centers are really kind of remaking themselves to be used in the cloud, a cloud style infrastructure, but basically private and not public. Some businesses, as you can probably guess, are not conducive due to the sensitivity of their data to be on a public cloud. But they can be designed using the same cloud technology, but be in a privately owned cloud. So because of that, most of the data center IP traffic is going to be in the cloud, and only 8% in traditional data centers. By 2020, you should see a three times the growth in the cloud workload every 5 years, and 3 times growth in IP traffic every 5 years, and 5 times worth of growth in data center storage. So you're going to basically see 7/8 of the data center storage in the cloud, 1/8 in traditional data centers, and 2/3 in public clouds, and 1/3 in private clouds. You're going to see 59% of customers using cloud storage, which is basically considered to be underestimated. After all, when you think about it, if you're using a smartphone, you're connected to the cloud, and a lot of people, even if they don't want to be using the cloud, are using the cloud at least somewhat. Also, keep in mind that this particular report is from 2016, and back then it was harder to see how technology was going to send more customers to the cloud, even though they are not aware or not necessarily choosing to use the cloud. I know, for example, some folks that have, they are kind of upset that their cell phone is no longer locally storing their photos, and they're basically being sent to the cloud. But that's basically a trend that's going to be continuing. Now, for me personally, I don't put any of my personal things on the cloud. I like to keep things on my hard drive. I guess when you're kind of in this business for a long time, and I've been doing this for about 31 years, there's certain things that you don't necessarily want to change, but I obviously, for my own personal security, I don't want to use the cloud for personal information. However, I do use the cloud for sharing. It's actually kind of interesting how in my daughter's high school, everything is, all their schoolwork is all done on the cloud. So if she wants me to look at her paper and check the grammar, we're on Google Docs, and I can do that very easily. So it's kind of, these young kids, which are going to be basically your future customers, are very much used to the cloud, and that's what they're comfortable with, just like I'm more comfortable using the traditional hard drive. The next thing we have is software-defined networking and network function virtualization, which we're going to talk about in great detail in this class. And basically, it is transporting 22% of data center traffic, and it's going to increase to 44%, basically doubling by 2020. So basically, when I first started teaching this class, it was a software-defined network and network function virtualization was basically a new idea, and it's becoming more and more commonplace. And just as an aside, one of the key things about this class is that it's very important for you to understand, what, where things are going, trend-wise, especially if you want to get a job in the networking field. And that's basically because, you know, most companies want to hire people that are familiar with, the things that they're going to have, where they're going to have most of their growth areas in. So if you're kind of more interested in kind of more the commodity part of networking without being interested or at least somewhat well versed in some of the trends, that's going to hurt you a little bit. And finally, just kind of another aside is that I strongly recommend that you read the reference document in the slide. That'll be very helpful and to kind of give you more detail than what I have on the slide as far as kind of where things are going. So definitely well worth your time reading. On this slide, we're going to talk about another report that Cisco produces called the Cisco Visual Network. It is a great resource to find out what is going on in networking, and it comes out every year. Basically, this report is focused on IP traffic. IP traffic is supposed to grow about three times in the next 5 years, or basically when the report was produced, from 2016 to 2021. During the busy hour, it's supposed to grow 5 times. So of course, the busy hour, of course, is the time during the work day. That's basically the business, the time when businesses are doing business. Obviously, that varies, across the globe. But in your particular time zone, the busy hour is basically the 9 to 5 traffic. This is very important for network designers because networks need to be designed for the busy hour. So if you design for average traffic, your network is going to be very slow during busy traffic. This is kind of similar, analogous to when you design a power supply. You have to design it to support the maximum power, not the average power. Another thing that is changing is the traffic is not coming from the PC anymore. The PC is going to only be one quarter of the traffic compared to 1/2 in 2016. And it's expected, likewise, that smartphone traffic is going to increase and is basically going to be 1/3 compared to 1/8 in 2016. That's important for network designers to know because phone traffic has different characteristics than your traditional PC traffic. Next, let's talk about the concept of CAGR. CAGR stands for Cumulative Annual Growth Rate. This is basically another way of saying how much are things going to grow per year. So currently, it's expected that the cumulative annual growth rate for PCs is going to be a low 21%. It's basically going to be surpassed by streaming TV, which is expected to have a cumulative annual growth rate of about 21%. This, of course, is due to the increasing popularity of streaming TV. Then we have tablets. Tablets are going to have a cumulative average growth rate of 29%. Now, tablets are interesting because they're not only growing for the consumer, but they're also growing for businesses as well. A lot of businesses that used to have, clipboards and things like that, a lot of them are going towards the use of tablets. Now we have our two other major growth areas. One, of course, is the smartphone, and that's going to have a 49% cumulative average growth rate, and that's going to increase not only because the number of smartphone users are going to increase, but also because smartphone capabilities are increasing as well, and as well as smartphone networks that can support those capabilities. And then 49% is the 49% cumulative average growth rate is also going to happen in the machine-to-machine environment. So basically what we mean by that, of course, is basically the Internet of Things environment, which as you think about it, there's going to be a lot of growth in that area. So understanding these numbers is very important to help you as a grad student, as well as if you are a new product developer as far as where you want to do your research. You don't want to waste your time, for example, researching PC traffic. You want to do research where the growth is. It's very important to be cognizant of what is happening and how things are changing. And finally, we have on this slide that by 2020, you're basically going to have 3 devices for every person on Earth. So we have 6 to 7 billion people on Earth, so somewhere between 18 to 21 billion devices. And in North America, you'll have about 14 devices per person. When you kind of think about it, if you add up everything that you have, including Internet of Things devices, you can very easily see how you can get to that 14 per person number. So let's talk about what is expected in the realm of video and mobile traffic. First of all, we can see that 4/5 of IP traffic will be video with a 4 times growth rate in the next 5 years. Now, this was not the case 5 years ago. This, of course, this trend for video traffic has had a big impact on networking simply because, of course, IP traditionally was not designed for video. So now going forward, you're going to see a lot of network design being focused on supporting video. You're starting to see that IEEE is working on a lot of new protocols that are designed for video. Next, we can see that 1/8 of video traffic will be live video. This is something that is being produced and consumed at the same time. This means there is a big urgency on time. And of course, this is a bigger challenge to process than storage video because storage video can be cached. And it is expected that this is going to have a 15 times growth rate in 5 years. And of course, you can see how streaming TV is kind of basically driving a lot of that. So this is a really big deal as far as a major trend. Another big component in video traffic is surveillance videos, especially security cameras. Not just in the corporate and business environment, but also these days in the personal home, we're seeing a lot of security cameras generating a lot of traffic that's going out to the internet. You basically have millions of minutes of videos being produced across the network every second. Basically, it would take you 5 million years to watch 1 second of worth of the video that's being produced. It's basically a cycle because basically what we see is there's more video on the internet because the internet is getting faster and then can handle more video. And so as more people use the internet for video, the internet providers and the internet product providers keep trying to make the internet go faster. So it's basically a cycle to kind of push the internet to grow faster. Another very important growth area is virtual reality and augmented reality. There is a lot going on in these two fields, and there's a lot of new vendors and new products coming out. An example would be the new 3D cameras. There's basically lots of new products, meaning there'll be lots of massive growth in the future. And finally, not surprising, we're going to see that mobile traffic will grow twice as fast as fixed IP traffic. Basically, mobile devices, smartphones, and tablets are going to be used a lot more often than your traditional PCs and laptops going forward. Next, we have here the latest Gartner hype cycle. So this is another slide that I've updated since the original slide deck. So as I mentioned previously, in addition to Cisco, the next place to find out what is going on is Gartner. Gartner publishes future projections about everything that you need to know in the world of emerging computer and networking technologies. They basically publish a report that costs about $5,000 each, and many companies buy it. It publishes what is known as the hype cycle. So what does hype mean? Hype is basically things that people are claiming, but is not necessarily true. So you basically have hype when people start putting money into technological ideas. And so when you have money put into an idea, the idea succeeds. So the world gets excited about a particular idea. Venture capitalists say, hey, let me put some money into this so I can make money. And these ideas grow. So if you look at these items here on the left-hand side of the curve, okay, in the innovation trigger part, okay, this is where the venture capitalists are investing. Okay, these are the things that are basically being researched, where there's basically people are just starting to put money into. Now, I'm pretty sure the 5G is probably since 2017 has kind of moved up the curve. But these, these items are the things that have people's attention, and you're starting to see more and more investment, venture capital investment, small startup companies. Once you get to the top of the curve, okay, if you're in these businesses and you've got your own small business, right now is the time to sell out to one of the big corporations because the stuff is about to get commoditized. So once the big companies get into a particular area, basically, so what ends up happening is either the big companies invest and the price goes down, or the big companies don't invest and the technologies die out. So that's kind of what you have in this point, where some things are either going to die out or they become commoditized. So basically the way that, the computer and networking business, like any other business, it's all about price. So what basically happens is basically the big businesses find ways to manufacture things cheaply and also find ways to continue to update and improve their software capability as well. And then after a while, you have some things that go to the trough of disillusionment where things didn't really take off. And then sometimes you have things that kind of get a second life to them. And basically, this is where the trend is. The last one available. I haven't got the access to the 2018 one. This is the last one that I have available. If you can find the 2018 one online, that would be good to compare it to this one. And what I did is I put this one in here. This is the 2016. So basically, it will allow you to kind of compare the two charts. So basically, it shows how things move. For example, blockchain was on the left in 2016 and ends up being on the right in 2017. So sometimes things move very fast. And in fact, sometimes things move so fast that even Gartner is caught off guard. For example, Gartner did not have blockchain on its list until 2015, even though it did exist before that, because sometimes a technology can come out quite, right out of the blue. So basically, this is all I have for the supplement slide, and I hopefully between these two slide packages you have a good handle on networking trends.